Bonjour à toutes et à tous. My name is Simon Mundy. I'm the Moral Money editor at the Financial Times and author of the climate book, Race for Tomorrow. And in this session, we're going to be talking about something which has really changed dramatically during the time, say, that I've been a journalist. When I joined the Financial Times a bit over 10 years ago, climate was not top of the agenda for the FT, and it was certainly not top of the agenda for the financial sector. Well, that has changed now. If you are the head of a big financial organization and you don't have a serious strategy on climate, then you're in trouble. So that's what we're going to be talking about in this session. We're going to kick off with a panel looking at regulation in this space, and we'll then turn to looking at the concrete solutions that investment companies and financial companies can offer. And we'll close with a discussion on the question of making sure that the energy transition is a just transition. So to start off, I'd like to invite to the stage Anne-Catherine Husson-Traore, who's the CEO and co-founder of Novethic, Alix Chosson, who's senior ESG analyst and climate and environment specialist at Candriam, and Constance, who is the CBDO at Greenomy. Welcome. So we're starting with regulation. I suppose some people, they might hear that word and their eyes glaze over and they think, oh my God, that sounds boring. Well, to an extent, maybe you've got a point, but then you stop and think, well, what is regulation? Regulation is about the rules that govern the global economy, the way that society operates, the winners and losers that emerge from our economic activity. And Europe, as I heard this week speaking with the head of financial services at the European Commission, Europe has been particularly active in this space. It's been moving faster and further than some other jurisdictions, but not without controversy and criticism from many quarters. So, Anne-Catherine, to start with you, could you give us an overview? And please don't assume that everybody already knows the details. Maybe some people are not familiar with everything already. So, in simple terms, where are we right now with European regulation in this area?
If we start off from the beginning was in 2018 when the EU Commission launched its first sustainable finance strategy. The idea was the Green Deal was at this first stage, and the idea was to find a way to push finance to become sustainable. And that's maybe the main point. The idea is not to really have a niche which is growing and growing. The idea is to really make a strong shift into finance from unsustainable model to sustainable model. How do they try to do that? First, they try to launch a green taxonomy, which has the purpose to define the same language, the same definition of activity, science-based definition.
Defines what is green.
What is green, because as far as you know, and that's why we have so many greenwashing accusations, everybody has his definition. So the idea, EU has to have a strict definition of what is green, what kind of activities can meet the Green Deal objectives. And first, it is the first stone. And the other way is to copy the meaning of the French law, which is dedicated to reporting, so to make some strong regulation to normalize the reporting on ESG data for investors. That is the regulation called Sustainable Finance Disclosure Regulation. And for companies, that's the CSRD, Corporate Sustainable Directive Reporting. So, in theory, it's very simple. You have green and obligation dedicated to taxonomy for companies and for investors. But since 2018, it was 5 years ago, and during 5 years, now we have a legislation with some slices which are not on the same agenda. And we have a very strong difficulties because, as far you know, in EU there is 3 parts to decide regulation: Council, Commission, and Parliament. And the Council is made by the state members. And every state member is still on his position, for example, on energy. So for the taxonomy, French make a strong battle to include nuclear. Germany make a strong battle to include gas. And at the end of the day, we have a taxonomy which is green, but it's a huge controversy about nuclear or gas could be green. And just maybe to end this very short overview, we survey all the utilities, the European utilities, about how they comply to taxonomy in this year, and no one has gas plants aligned with the taxonomy criteria. So we still are in the middle of something. The purpose, which is really strong, ambitious, and useful, but the implementation is quite complicated and quite longer than we hoped in 5 years ago.
Thank you so much. It's a wonderful overview of where we stand. And as you say, it's really complicated. It sounds so simple in practice. You just say, well, that's green and that's not. But politics enters into the equation. France has a lot more interest in nuclear being considered green because it obviously has so much nuclear power. Similarly, Germany with gas. And to some people, what started as a scientific exercise has become overly influenced by economics, national economics and politics. But Alix, so you work for an asset management company with a real focus on trying to do things sustainably. And I know that a lot of asset management companies who manage the savings of all of us in one way or another are quite unhappy about how the European Union has been implementing its regulations in this space. What do you think? I mean, do you have sympathy for the European Union? They're really trying to do a very difficult thing, or have some easily avoidable mistakes been made?
Okay, very, very interesting and controversial question. So I won't speak for the whole of the asset managers. I will only speak for Candriam and for what we have seen. So the first thing is, and it is our view as well, that we needed regulation. So that's for sure. I mean, so the whole ESG industry had developed quite a lot. And we could see that on the market, you had funds and investment strategies that were labeled as ESG that had a lot of different environmental and social credentials. So we needed some clarity. And if we wanted to ultimately avoid greenwashing, because nobody wants greenwashing as investors, we don't want greenwashing to happen. And if we want to also reallocate capital towards green, towards sustainable activities, we really needed some clarity about what is sustainable, what is green, and what is not. So in that respect, we needed regulation, and it's a good thing that the Commission has moved forward with some pieces of regulation. Then obviously, when you have new regulation, there are always some questions and some challenges. I will just name a couple of challenges. So yeah, as you mentioned, the taxonomy, which was supposed to be a scientific consensus, ended up in a political compromise, basically. So then for investors, it's very, very difficult to implement the taxonomy. Why? Because if we manage money for German pension fund, they will say, for us, nuclear is not green, so just disregard nuclear. And then you manage money for French pension fund, and they will say, well, for us, nuclear is green, so you can put nuclear. So you can imagine just the set of different preferences and different values that you have to manage, which is okay when it's, you know, ESG and the mandate that your clients give you. When it's the taxonomy that is supposed to be just a clear common ground and framework to say what is green, it is very, very complicated. So, okay, taxonomy, and we only talk about climate in the taxonomy, so now it has moved to other environmental issues. Wait for social, because I'm pretty sure that for social, we will have as well different views of what is socially beneficial and what is not. So this exercise from the beginning was supposed to be very complicated, very, yeah, you always have politics in those kind of exercise. So this is what happened. I think it was expected. It's a little bit a disappointment that even on climate that is pretty simple, we cannot agree on what is definitely green. So that's the first thing. The second thing that has been a challenge in the regulation. And sorry for all the acronyms, you don't need to remember all the acronyms. So you have CSRD, which is about the reporting for corporates, so what companies have to report on in terms of ESG. And then you have SFDR, which is what investors will have to do to justify that our investments are sustainable, in a nutshell. The thing is, the requirements on investors have been applied before the requirements for companies. And these create a gap, and this creates then, this moment where we have to rely a lot on estimates and a lot on data provided by data providers. And that has been an issue because ultimately this is what we want. We want investors to make investment decisions based on sustainable data, reliable sustainable data. If we don't have those reliable sustainable data from corporate, it's very difficult as investors to then make the right investment decision.
Does it just seem a bit crazy because it's just the wrong way round, isn't it? You know, first you would want to get the companies to disclose the data, and then you get the investment companies that invest in those companies to do their own reports. So why did it end up being done the wrong way round?
Maybe Anne-Catherine would be a better place.
Yeah, I can just mention it because it was really a question of agenda. Because if you remember, in 2015, because of COP21 on all the commitments done at that time, the financial sector appeared for the EU Commission the leaders of the world. It means that if they have some obligations to do so, they have the power and the money and the ability to make pressure on companies to produce this kind of data. And EU has just adopted what they called NFRD, Non-Financial Reporting Directive, in 2014. So they found that it was too touchy to really make a remake of build a European regulation on that. But just after the launch of the Sustainable Finance strategy, they discovered that it was impossible because of what Alix said, that all the investors says we cannot apply, we cannot comply with SFDR if we have not the right and normalized ESG data from companies on a large scale. And that's why after that, at the end of 2018, they say, okay, we don't have choice. We need to make our planet great again, but make our regulation great again. So
there was corporate pressure played a role. Constance, it's always important to remember why this matters. We have this enormous climate crisis. We are not on track to avoid climate disaster at the moment. And to get on track, we have to have enormous amounts of money that are currently putting us on the wrong track, putting us on the right track, going towards more sustainable economic activities, going towards green energy, not going so much towards fossil fuels. And around the world, there are people with personal savings, pension savings, whatever it might be, who really want those assets to be used in a sustainable way to fund greener activities. But they don't know how to do that because you've got all these funds that are labeled green and sustainable and ESG, but the regulation is often not really there to enable you to know that they really are what they claim to be. How big do you think that problem is at the moment, and how close do you think we're getting to regulation that will fix that problem?
So first, I'd like to say that I agreed with the co-panelists on, let's say, the difficulties of the beginning of this coming new regulation. I do have some sympathy for Europe. It's a complex matter. I do think it's a game changer. It's a change in paradigm in the way we approach, let's say, sustainable finance investment, because we are bringing the same culture of requirements that is in the investment, let's say, for financial purpose, to now extra financial, and this is greatly needed because we are in, as you say, we are in a climate crisis, and we need, and by the way, it's ESG because you need to encompass all elements if you want to make it a just transition, which is the topic of today. And so it is urgent that we act, and the financial sector has a great role to play. And and you cannot start a strategy without first a baseline. I mean, this is a 1.0 strategy consulting, and so this all regulation will bring the necessary baseline. So there's been mismatch in timing, but what we see now, helping corporates comply with the regulation, and there will be more with the CSRD coming up. There will be more and more companies forced to comply. This gap will be progressively filled, and let's say the growing, the nascent industry errors will probably be solved. It doesn't go on one day that the whole thing can be adopted, so due to its complexity, but I think it is such an important matter that we need all stakeholders to understand the strategic value of it and not only the compliance burden of it, so that we accelerate the adoption. And this can go now, right now, from the investors and the banks putting pressure on the company to report, as well as from the company to be educated on the strategic importance of this, and not only just the compliance aspect.
Yeah, it's really interesting to consider the extent to which you have the push factors and the pull factors. You have the push factors of companies being scared of regulation or simply responding to regulation or being scared of public criticism. But the pull factors, the carrots, the opportunities to make money from smart investments in cleaner technologies, the opportunities to manage money for people who really want a sustainable investing strategy. I wonder, Alix, from your point of view, how much can the investment industry do on its own? If we think already there are lots of voluntary initiatives, we have the Net Zero Asset Managers Initiative, GFANZ, as is known for covering various parts of the financial sector. But there are others who would say, well, if we put too much emphasis on voluntary effort, we get distracted from the need for regulation.
So very good question, very simple answer. I think most of the investors are now part of some kind of net zero alliance, although some are pulling out, but let's say most of the money is supposed to be managed according to some kind of net zero principles, but global emission keep rising. So for me, it's very simple. It means that something is not done. And it means that probably those voluntary initiatives that are very good at the beginning in gathering the momentum and really putting pressure as well on regulator to say we want to act and so we want to go in that direction, they are not enough and we will need more regulation. There are a lot of explanation for why we don't see global emission decreasing, while we can see that the investors and companies all want to go towards this net zero aim. But it's very clear that if the IEA says that we need drastic changes in our economy, it means that we need drastic changes in the way we invest. That is very clear. And so that's what we need to implement. As an investor, we always talk about performance and risk, and the couple of the more you want performance, the more you need to take risk. Well, we need carbon to be included in this equation. The same as you have a risk budget to have a certain performance, you need to have a carbon budget as well to reach this kind of performance. So I think probably, I would not say all investors, but probably the most active and most engaged in that direction are putting those kind of tools in place. But definitely, I think we will need some regulation, or at least some common standards to define what does net zero means, what are the relevant methodologies to assess that, how can also clients, and we talk about institutional clients, but also retail clients, everybody. The thing is, it's getting so complicated that I think we're losing a little bit as well savers and just retail investors. So we need as well regulation to make sure that we report transparent information, but transparent information that is honest and that is very clear as well for investors in order for them to make decision. So yeah, so we can obviously debate a lot about all those topics, but I think for me that's we're not doing enough, and I hope that regulation can help as well in just setting some kind of common direction.
Yeah, it's about driving that transparency across the board, and then a lot will follow from that. Anne-Catherine, there was a really interesting point from Alix about how there's a real limit to how far the financial industry is going to be able to go or even willing to go without regulation. How much enthusiasm do you think there is in the financial industry for the kind of radical change that Alix was talking about? Are they fully supportive of the kind of regulations that will be needed, or do you think there are some actors trying to slow things down?
Maybe the problem is to think about one only single financial industry. I just read yesterday a post on LinkedIn written by Adam Matthews, who is in charge of responsible investment strategy from Church of England. And he says that he was talking about AGM of oil and gas sector. And he said, okay, we have a problem because since 5 years, through Climate Action 100 Plus, which is a coalition with all the big investors, who do a lot to push oil and gas companies to really address the climate change issues. And they don't succeed to do so. And now we have a strong battle, which everybody could see that. We saw a lot of policemen in front of the Total AGM this morning in Paris. So this is something crazy in a way. But this shows very obviously that we are in the middle of something. We have on one side the short-term investors, which very often are what we call in French the small shareholders, people who are there. We really are fighting the green activists who want to explain that the fossil fuel model is really killing climate change and planet and so on. And the violence is getting harder and harder from every year. So Adam Matthews explained, he was saying precisely, now it's clear that the strategy, the climate strategy of oil and gas companies the purpose is to maximize the short-term interests. So it could be good for a part of their shareholders, but it's contrary to the interest of a pension fund like us. Because we are long-term investors, and if climate change is more and more problematic, we really lose a lot more than we expected 5 years ago. So, and maybe that's the most interesting point. You say, okay, that's over to try with shareholder engagement from investors to oil and gas companies. So we now have to put pressure and demand. The idea is, okay, with the oil and gas sector, we don't succeed because of the war in Ukraine and many other factors. But we can really put pressure now on demand, on car industry, on plane industry, on all industry which are using oil and gas to stop to do that, to make that transition, because maybe the wrong thing is to address oil and gas sector. So my point is to say that we are not, because many investors others who claim to be carbon neutral in 2015, they really hope to have a solution between 2048 and 2049, which could solve everything. Everybody knows that it doesn't work like that. And many of them understood that if they want to meet this target, they have to change and to make strong change, as Alix says, but we need to do that in order. We need to do that, it's French way of speaking, we need to do that with normalized data, with normalized strategy, which targets, and Green Deal is a very clear targets. But the problem is, right now, no climate strategy or others are really aligned with Green Deals or with Paris Agreement. And that's really our main problem.
Constance, what would be your take on this, just for closing thoughts? So you work with companies to help them to report around sustainability, and you help them to share the reports that they produce. How impressed are you by what the private sector is doing in this space, whether it's financial companies, non-financial companies? Are they really trying their hardest, or are regulators going to have to push them?
I think that there's a real discrepancy. I mean, like there's not one financial sector, there's not one company either. So there are a different approach. I am, of course, very convinced of those sustainable finance regulations. So I'm aligned with the frontrunner, and I'm really convinced that there's a lot of value for those who are adopting those reporting regulation as soon as possible, even before actually the mandate to report, because it should be used as a strategic tool, as a definition of where you stand, and then where you can go. And we see that. So we see this discrepancy. There are that are just seeing this as a regulatory report exercise, and they are not in a hurry to act. And they see it as painful. And we've seen that the first report going out, actually, there was 50% of reports that were accurate, so with the correct data and the right format. So it's a new requirement. There are challenges. But we see as well frontrunners who do succeed and who do provide a full report as mandated. And that shows that it's actually feasible. And I'm talking from the company side. But this company side exercise is, of course, very relevant to the investors, because those are the data that ultimately they want to collect. They are super granular. They are standardized. They allow for comparability. So you can really make, let's say, informed choice, investment choice, informed risk decision. And so that's for me, it's a future, and it's a natural, a professional way of addressing this transition emergency. And so what we see as well is that on the banking side, I would say compared to the investor side, they're a bit ahead, and probably also because they were even more lacking data than the investor, because I would say if you work with large listed, there was quite some voluntary data, but still some. While if you think about loan issues, and if you think about smaller company, there was really nothing. I was talking to some, let's say, large data provider. We are discussing the state of proxy for sustainability for, let's say, companies that are not the large listed one. And there, basically, what they say is the proxy were just by industry the same, meaning it's like everyone has the same score, so what's the value? I mean, there's no value out of it. So that's why there's a need for data that are much more granular and that can be compared, and that enables investors to see, okay, this one is a good one, or this one, maybe it's not a good one, but this one, there's a high potential to improve him fast, because we can see that from others who have done that, they manage to transition. So it's not only about rewarding the good one, it's about also helping, let's say, the bad ones, sorry for that, but the ones that are lagging in the transition.
We can't expect everyone to
go
be
faster.
Front runners, and we can't rely on good intentions alone. Well, that was a wonderful discussion to kick off this session. Thank you so much to all the panelists. Please give them a big hand.